The HOA thought they could
You
scare
think
me
this
off
is
with
funny?
flashing
You
lights
are
and loud
violating
threats. I had
17
barely
HOA
eased my small
bylaws.
boat into the
17.
water when two
Wow,
patrol
that's a new
cars
record.
screeched to a stop, sirens slicing through the
I can't
peaceful
believe
evening
it,
air.
it's
Their
finally
president,
mine.
Karen, stomped down the dock with her arms crossed and a smirk that screamed power. She barked that I was trespassing, that this lake and marina belonged to the community, and that I'd better pull my boat out before the police hauled me away. What she didn't know, and what made me smile as the officers stepped closer, was that the deed to this lake had been sitting in my truck all along. Within 10 minutes, the cops, the HOA, and every gawking neighbor would realize the truth. This wasn't their lake. It was mine. And by the time the night was over, I'd owned something even bigger, their precious marina. Asterisk, the first time I set eyes on the lake, it didn't feel like real life. The water stretched wide and still, a deep sheet of blue glass reflecting the sky. On quiet mornings, mist curled like lazy smoke across the surface, and the cries of distant loons echoed like some forgotten music. It was the kind of place people dream about when they've spent too many years surrounded by traffic and city lights. I had been one of those people for far too long. After years of grinding city work, endless commutes, and nights where the sound of honking horns became a kind of sad lullaby, I wanted something different, something permanent. That lake became my promise of peace. The cabin I found was small, tucked away at the far end of a private gravel road that wound through a thicket of tall pines. The real estate agent called it rustic, which was a polite way of saying it needed work. The paint peeled in sun-bleached flakes, the porch sagged like a tired old man, and the windows rattled whenever the wind picked up. But it had good bones and, more importantly, its backyard spilled directly into the water. When I stood on the back deck and looked across the ripples, I could almost feel the noise of my old life draining out of me. The decision to buy it wasn't even a question. I signed the papers the same day I first walked through the front door. During the closing process, I made sure to read every word of the property deed. The agent kept pointing out the obvious things: square footage, boundary lines, road access, but what caught my eye was the language describing the water rights. According to the survey maps, my property line didn't just stop at the shore. It stretched a few dozen yards into the lake itself, covering a triangular wedge of submerged land. That meant I had direct access to the water without needing anyone's permission. To me, that detail felt like a gift. I didn't care about fancy legal language or measurements. All I knew was that no one could tell me I couldn't fish, swim, or launch a boat from my own backyard. For the first few weeks, life at the lake felt like a dream finally come true. I woke each morning to the smell of pine needles and damp earth. I spent my days repairing the cabin, sealing cracks, and sanding old wood until it shone with a soft, golden glow. Sometimes, in the evenings, I'd walk down to the shore and skip stones across the water, each plunk echoing through the trees like a small celebration. From my side of the lake, I could see the distant lights of a marina on the opposite bank. At first, I didn't think much of it. The place looked lively, rows of boats tied to neat wooden docks, people gathering around fire pits as the sun dipped behind the hills. I figured it was just another neighborhood with its own little club. Their world didn't cross into mine, and that was fine by me. It wasn't until my second weekend at the cabin that I began to notice the signs, literal ones. As I drove into town for groceries, I passed a wooden post near the public road with a freshly painted board that read, "Private HOA property, beyond this point, residents and guests only." I frowned but didn't think much of it. My driveway branched off before the sign, and my deed made it clear that my land was independent of any association. Still, something about the bold red letters left a faint itch in the back of my mind. When I asked the clerk at the local hardware store about it, he gave a short laugh and shook his head. "That'd be the Willow Creek Lake Homeowners Association," he said. "They like to think they own the whole lake. Technically they don't, but they sure act like it." That should have been my first warning. Over the next few days, I began noticing other small gestures of territory. New buoys bobbed near the center of the lake, each one carrying bright plastic signs with messages like, "No unauthorized launching and HOA marina members only." On quiet afternoons, when I sat on my deck with a coffee, I'd catch sight of their patrol boats slowly cruising along the water, their white hulls slicing through the calm like silent enforcers. They never came close to my shore, but I could feel their eyes on me. It was as if they were waiting for me to make a move. The move came sooner than even I expected. After settling in and finishing the bulk of the cabin repairs, I decided it was finally time to enjoy the lake the way I'd always imagined. Fishing had been a hobby of mine since childhood, and the thought of casting a line into the water right from my backyard filled me with a quiet thrill. I bought a small aluminum boat from a retiree in town, a modest craft with just enough space for a cooler and a single outboard motor. The morning I planned to launch, it was warm and bright, the kind of day that begged you to be on the water. I backed the boat down a narrow dirt path. I'd cleared myself and eased it onto a makeshift wooden ramp I'd built along the shore. The moment the boat's hull touched the water, I felt a surge of excitement, pure, simple, unfiltered joy. The air smelled of wet cedar and gasoline from the motor. Birds swooped low over the water, and somewhere across the lake, a distant engine hummed like a lazy bee. I pushed the boat off the ramp and climbed aboard, the metal creaking under my boots. My plan was simple: take a slow circle around the lake, maybe cast a line or two, and finally feel what it was like to have a piece of this world to myself. I had barely moved 50 yards from shore when a sharp voice cut through the stillness. Hey, you there? I turned and spotted a woman standing on the opposite bank near the marina, waving her arms like a traffic signal. Even from that distance, I could see the shine of a cell phone in her hand and the angry tilt of her shoulders. You can't launch from there, she shouted, her voice carrying across the water like a drill sergeant's command. This is HOA property. That ramp is unauthorized. I raised a hand in a casual wave and kept motoring. My ramp wasn't unauthorized. It was on my own land. But her reaction sparked a small flare of irritation in my chest. I'd expected maybe a curious neighbor or a friendly hello, not a stranger barking orders across the water. Within minutes, I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance. At first I thought it must be a coincidence. But as the sound grew louder and closer, the realization hit me like a stone dropped into the lake. She had called the cops. 2 patrol cars appeared along the narrow road that wound behind my cabin, their red and blue lights flickering against the trees. The peaceful morning air snapped with the sudden energy of authority doors slamming, radios crackling, footsteps crunching over gravel. I steered the boat back toward shore, my heart pounding, though not with fear. I knew I was in the right, but there's something about flashing lights that tightens every muscle. No matter how innocent you are, as I guided the boat onto the ramp, I caught sight of the woman again. She had crossed the lake in a small motorboat and now stood on my shoreline, arms folded like a self-appointed queen guarding her castle. Her short blonde hair whipped in the breeze, and her mouth curved into a smirk that practically dripped with triumph. Behind her, 2 uniformed officers approached cautiously, their hands resting on their belts. The woman pointed sharply at me as if presenting evidence. That's him, she barked. He's trespassing and launching illegally. This is private lake property. You need to remove him immediately. The officers glanced at each other, then at me. One of them, a tall man with tired eyes, stepped forward. Sir, he said in a neutral tone, we received a complaint from the Willow Creek HOA about unauthorized boating activity. Can you explain what's going on here? I took a slow breath and stepped off the boat, letting my boots sink into the damp earth of my own shoreline. Sure can, I said calmly. First, this is my property. Second, this ramp is on my land. And third, I have every right to launch my boat from here. I reached into the cab of my truck, which sat parked a few yards away, and pulled out a thick folder of documents I had prepared when I bought the cabin. I had a feeling they might come in handy someday, though I hadn't imagined it would be this soon. The officer accepted the folder and began flipping through the pages. Survey maps, deed transfers, county stamps, all the proof anyone could ask for. The woman who I would later learn was named Karen, of course, leaned forward, trying to peer over his shoulder. That can't be right, she snapped. The HOA owns this lake. It's all in our bylaws, ma'am, the officer said patiently without looking up. Your bylaws don't override county property records. He handed the documents back to me with a small nod of acknowledgement. Everything checks out. This gentleman is within his rights. Karen's face twisted into a mix of outrage and disbelief. But he can't just. This lake belongs to the community, she sputtered. I simply smiled, tucking the papers back into the folder. My heart still raced, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was the slow burn of satisfaction. They had come here expecting to bully me off my own land. Instead, they've just been handed their first lesson in who actually held the power. The officers exchanged a few quiet words with Karen, then turned back toward their cars. Have a good day, sir, the taller one said. Enjoy your boat. With that, they left the way they'd come, the echo of their engines fading into the trees. Karen remained frozen on the shore, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I stepped back onto my boat, started the motor, and eased out onto the water again, the ripples spreading behind me like a signature on a quiet victory. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the lake was quiet, but it felt different than it had before. The mist still curled lazily across the water, and the sun still threw gold onto the ripples. But there was a charge in the air, an unspoken tension I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was because of the way Karen's eyes had burned into me the night before. Maybe it was the way she'd stood frozen as the cops drove off, her authority evaporating like dew under the rising sun. Whatever it was, I could feel it in my chest when I stepped out onto the deck with my coffee. I'd won the first round, but something told me the game wasn't over. I tried to brush off the feeling by focusing on the simple tasks of the morning. I checked the lines I'd left in the water overnight, mended a loose board on the ramp, and oiled the motor on my boat. The work should have calmed me, but every creak of the dock and every snap of a branch in the woods made me glance toward the marina. Across the water, their docks looked neat and quiet, but I could almost imagine Karen pacing along the planks, plotting her next move. People like her didn't give up after one loss. They regrouped by mid-morning. My suspicion proved right. A white SUV rolled down the narrow gravel road that led to my cabin. The sound of crunching tires echoed through the trees before the vehicle appeared. I set down my wrench and waited, leaning casually against my truck. The SUV slowed to a stop in front of my driveway, and the driver's window slid down with an electric hum. A man in a crisp polo shirt and mirrored sunglasses peered out at me. He looked like someone who'd spent his life playing golf and giving orders. "Morning," he said, his voice smooth but carrying a hint of steel. "I'm Bill Carson, Vice President of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. You must be the new neighbor." I gave a polite nod. "That's me, and you must be here because Karen didn't like how yesterday went." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Karen can be enthusiastic. I'm here to clear up what I think is a misunderstanding. You see, while you may own the shoreline, the HOA holds recreational rights to the lake. That means any launches, fishing, or boating technically require HOA approval." I crossed my arms and let a slow breath slip through my teeth. "That's funny. The county records don't mention anything about recreational rights. They show property lines, not HOA fantasies." Bill's smile tightened. "I'm sure you're new to this area, so you may not be familiar with how we operate. Our residents pay significant dues to maintain the marina and water quality. We can't just have anyone launching boats and stirring up sediment or causing hazards." "Anyone?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Bill, I'm not anyone. I'm a landowner with direct access to this water. And yesterday, the police confirmed that I'm within my rights to launch from my property. If you'd like, I can show you the deed again." For a brief second, something flickered behind his sunglasses, a twitch of irritation. He cleared his throat. "Let's not escalate things. What we'd like is simple. Join the HOA. It's only a modest fee, and you'll have full access to the marina, community events, and, of course, the lake. It's the easiest way to avoid complications." There it was, the sales pitch wrapped in a thread. I'd seen it before in city contracts, shady landlords, and corporate negotiations. It was the same language bullies always used, soft words hiding sharp hooks. I straightened and gave him a flat smile. "Thanks, but I don't need access to something I already own. You and Karen can keep your marina. I'll keep my freedom." Bill's jaw tightened, but he forced another smile. "Well, think it over. We'd hate to see neighborly relations sour." With that, he put the SUV in reverse and backed down the driveway, his tires spitting gravel like a warning. I watched him disappear into the trees, my heart thumping harder than I wanted to admit. It wasn't fear, it was anger. The arrogance of it all. They thought they could wrap their rules around me like a net and pull me into their system. But the more they pushed, the more certain I became. I wasn't just going to stand my ground. I was going to dig in. For the rest of the day, I stayed close to the cabin. Half expecting another friendly visit, I worked on reinforcing the ramp, adding a second set of planks and anchoring it deeper into the shore. I repaired a loose step on the back deck and trimmed the brush along my driveway to improve visibility. Part of me hated that I felt the need to fortify my own property, but another part of me found it satisfying. Each nail I drove and board I tightened was a quiet declaration. This is mine. Late in the afternoon, I decided to take the boat out again. The sun hung low, turning the water into a sheet of molten gold. As I pushed away from the ramp, I noticed a small group gathering on the far docks of the marina. Through the shimmering distance, I recognized Karen's distinctive blonde bob and the sharp gestures of her arms. Beside her, several other HOA members stood with folded arms, their silhouettes stiff against the fading light. It was clear they were watching me, their little council of enforcers observing every move. I waved cheerfully. Only one man returned the gesture, a tentative lift of the hand before Karen shot him a glare. I cruised slowly around the lake, savoring the hum of the motor and the cool spray on my face. The farther I drifted from shore, the more I noticed details I'd overlooked before. The way the marina docks extended slightly past their surveyed boundary, the faint line of buoys that seemed suspiciously close to my underwater property line. An idea began to form in the back of my mind, one that had less to do with fishing and more to do with leverage. When I returned to shore, I pulled out the folder of property documents and spread them across the kitchen table. The papers smelled faintly of ink and pine, a mix of old bureaucracy and new beginnings. I traced the lines on the survey map with my finger, noting the coordinates of my submerged property wedge. The more I studied it, the clearer it became. The HOA's marina wasn't just close to my line, it overlapped it. A few of their prized slips were anchored directly above land I legally owned. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. No wonder Karen was so desperate to keep me out. They'd built their empire partly on ground that wasn't theirs. And if I wanted to, I could make things very uncomfortable for them. That night, as the moon cast silver streaks across the water, I sat on the deck with a notebook and began to plan. The HOA thought they were the only ones who could set rules. They believed their bylaws gave them the power to control the lake. But power built on shaky ground can crumble fast when the real owner decides to push back. The following morning, I drove into town and stopped by the county records office. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with a sharp memory and a friendly smile, greeted me by name apparently. News of yesterday's police visit had already made the rounds. "Heard you gave the HOA a good run," she said with a grin. "What brings you in today?" "I need copies of the latest marina property filings," I said. "Every permit, survey, and easement you've got." She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Within minutes, She returned with a thick stack of documents. I flipped through them at the counter, my eyes scanning for discrepancies. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The Marina's expansion permits from 5 years ago. Their docks extended farther than the original plans allowed, and there was no record of a revised boundary agreement. In plain language, they were trespassing. Driving back to the cabin, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the satisfaction of catching someone breaking their own rules. It was a sense of control. For weeks, I'd been adjusting to the rhythms of the lake, letting it calm me and teach me patience. Now, I realized the lake had given me something else, an edge I hadn't known I possessed. That evening, as the sun set behind the pines, I took another slow ride around the lake. The HOA members were out again, their silhouettes lined along the marina like a row of nervous statues. Karen stood at the center, her posture stiff and commanding. I raised a friendly hand and called out across the water, my voice carrying easily in the still air. "Beautiful night, isn't it? Hope you're all enjoying my lake." Even from a distance I could see Karen stiffen. She shouted something I couldn't quite hear, but I didn't need the words to understand the message. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As I cut the motor and let the boat drift, I looked across the glowing water and felt something settle deep inside me. They had their bylaws and their meetings. I had the deed, the proof, and now, the leverage. The game had shifted, and for the first time, I wasn't just defending my rights. I was preparing to take something from them, something they valued more than rules, more than pride. The marina lights flickered on as darkness fell, each one reflecting in the rippling water like a tiny challenge. I smiled to myself, already thinking of the next step. Karen and her board had no idea how close they were to losing more than just an argument. 2 days after my quiet ride around the lake, I awoke before dawn with a strange mix of calm and determination. The early air smelled of wet pine and cool stone, the kind of crispness that makes every breath feel like a reset. For years I'd been the type to keep my head down, avoid conflict, and trust that people would do the right thing if you just stayed polite. But living here and dealing with the HOA was teaching me something different. Sometimes, the only way to keep what's yours is to stop waiting for fairness and start playing the game smarter than the people who think they own it. I brewed a pot of strong coffee and spread my growing stack of documents across the kitchen table. Survey maps, purchase agreements, county notices. They looked like a wall of paper armor. The most important piece sat right on top. The filing that proved the HOA Marina extended beyond its permitted boundary and into my underwater property wedge. The ink on that paper might as well have been gold. With it, I had the power to disrupt everything they valued, their docks, their slips, their so-called private lake. But as satisfying as that idea was, I knew it had to be handled carefully. A single wrong move, and they'd bury me in lawsuits or drag the county into a mess that could take years to untangle. By mid-morning, the fog lifted and sunlight spilled across the lake in ribbons of silver. I decided to take a drive into town. Not for groceries this time, but to visit an old friend I hadn't seen in years, a real estate lawyer named Mark Jensen. Mark and I went to college together, back when life was all late night, pizza, and big dreams. He'd built a reputation as the guy you called when a neighbor tried to fence off your backyard or a developer tried to squeeze you out of your own land. If anyone could help me turn a legal technicality into a shield, it was him. Mark's office sat above a Batanta coal shop on the edge of Main Street. When I stepped inside, he looked up from his cluttered desk and broke into a grin. "Well, if it isn't the man who ran off to live by the water," he said, standing to shake my hand. "What brings you in? Don't tell me you're already bored of the quiet life." "Not bored," I said, dropping the folder onto his desk, "but I think my neighbors are. They've been a little too interested in my side of the lake." As Mark flipped through the documents, his smile faded into a look of sharp focus. "They built their docks across your property line?" he asked, tapping one of the survey maps. "And they don't have an updated easement or boundary agreement?" "Exactly," I said. "They've been enforcing rules they don't have the authority to enforce. They called the cops on me for launching my boat, but the officers left once they saw the deed." Mark leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "You've got leverage, no question. With these papers, you could demand they remove the docks, pay you for use of the submerged land, or even shut down operations until they fix the permits. The county would back you if you pushed it." "Good," I said, "but I don't just want to stop them. I want to make sure they can't touch me again. Ever." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled the way a chess player does when they see a winning move 3 turns ahead. "Then you don't fight them head. You buy the ground out from under them." I blinked. "Buy it. Not the lake itself, you already own part of it. But the marina's developer might still hold rights to the main structure or the financing. If the HOA is leasing or paying off a loan, there's a chance those rights could be transferred. If you purchase those, you wouldn't just have leverage, you'd have control." The idea settled over me like a sunrise breaking through clouds. It was bold, maybe even reckless, but it made perfect sense. Instead of playing defense, I could flip the board entirely. Mark promised to dig into the marina's financial filings and title history. "Give me a few days," he said. "If there's a crack in their foundation, I'll find it." Driving back to the cabin, I felt a quiet rush of energy. For the first time since moving here, I wasn't just reacting to the HOA's games. I was moving first. When I pulled into my driveway, a familiar white SUV was parked just beyond my property line. Bill Carson leaned against the hood, arms crossed, wearing the same polite smile that barely hid his irritation. Behind him stood Karen, her posture as rigid as the dock pilings she loved to defend. I killed the engine and stepped out, keeping my expression neutral. "Afternoon," Bill said, pushing off the SUV. "We were hoping to have a word." "I figured you might," I replied. "What's the occasion?" "More friendly invitations to join your club." Karen stepped forward before Bill could answer. "We've reviewed our bylaws," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "And while the police may have been mistaken, we have the right to enforce community standards. Launching a boat without HOA approval violates those standards." I raised an eyebrow. "Community standards don't apply to property outside your community. We've been through this." Bill held up a calming hand. "Look, nobody wants this to escalate. We're offering a compromise. Join the HOA at the standard membership rate, and we'll grant you full use of the marina and waive any retroactive fees. It's a fair offer." I let a beat of silence stretch, then smiled faintly. "You're offering me access to something I already have. That's not a compromise. That's a sales pitch." Karen's face reddened, her voice rising. "If you continue to violate the rules, we'll fine you daily. We'll take legal action if necessary." I took a slow step closer, lowering my voice so they had to lean in to hear. "Go ahead, call your lawyers. But before you do, maybe check the county records. You might find that some of those precious marina slips you've been renting out are sitting on land you don't own, land that belongs to me." For a split second, both of them froze. Bill's confident smile faltered. Karen blinked hard, her mouth tightening into a thin line. "That's ridiculous," she said. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Is it?" I asked softly. "Because the county survey says otherwise, and I've got the paperwork to prove it. Maybe next time you try to enforce a rule, you should make sure you're standing on your own property." Bill recovered first, forcing a chuckle that didn't match the worry in his eyes. "We'll review our records," he said quickly. "But this conversation isn't over." "Agreed," I said. "But next time, bring a map." They left without another word, their SUV kicking up a trail of dust as it disappeared down the road. I stood in the fading light, heart pounding. It wasn't just the thrill of the confrontation, it was the realization that they finally understood the truth. For the first time, they knew they weren't untouchable. That night, as I sat on the deck watching moonlight shimmer across the water, I thought about the next steps. Mark would soon uncover the marina's financial secrets. If the developer still held a stake, I could move quietly, maybe even acquire their rights before the HOA knew what hit them. I pictured the look on Karen's face when she learned that the docks she fought so hard to control now belonged to the very man she tried to drive away. The thought warmed me more than the coffee cooling in my hand. Over the next few days, I kept to my routine, fishing in the mornings and repairing the cabin by afternoon. From across the lake, I noticed more activity than usual. HOA members huddled in tense clusters, boats shuttling back and forth, papers passed from hand to hand. Whatever was happening on their side, it carried the air of urgency. I imagined emergency meetings filled with heated arguments, Karen demanding answers, Bill scrambling for solutions. The idea made me smile. Late on the third evening, my phone buzzed with a call from Mark. "Got something for you," he said, his voice brisk with excitement. "The marina isn't fully owned by the HOA. They leased the main dock structure and several slips from a private developer who defaulted on a loan last year. The bank's been quietly looking for a buyer. And here's the best part. The HOA doesn't have first right refusal. If you make an offer, you can buy it out from under them." For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. The path was suddenly wide open. Not only could I protect my shoreline, I could own the very heart of the lake they claimed as theirs. "What's the next step?" I asked. "I'll draft the paperwork," Mark said. "Move fast. Keep it quiet. If they find out, they'll try to block the sale or drive up the price." After hanging up, I stared out at the dark lake, the marina lights winking like a constellation on the far shore. A slow, steady satisfaction settled over me. The HOA thought they were tightening their grip, but they were standing on a trap door, and I held the lever. The night was silent, except for the gentle lap of waves against the dock. I thought about Karen's shrill commands, Bill's fake smiles, the endless threats wrapped in polite words. They had spent months trying to intimidate me with their rules. Now, without even raising my voice, I was about to take everything they valued most. The lake reflected the stars above, each ripple spreading out like a quiet promise. This wasn't just about a boat launch anymore. It was about power, about standing up to people who thought they could control everything. And by the time the next sunrise broke across the water, I knew exactly what I intended to do: sign the papers, secure the rights, and let the HOA wake up to a new reality, one where their precious marina belonged to the man they tried to drive away. The next morning, the air around the lake carried a tense hush that almost felt unnatural. Usually by sunrise, the gentle slap of water against the docks mixed with the cheerful sounds of early fishermen and morning joggers from the HOA community across the lake. But that day, the air felt heavy, as if the lake itself knew a storm of a different kind was about to break. I sipped my coffee on the porch of my cabin, staring at the fog lifting off the water and thinking about everything that had unfolded the night before. The cops had left shaking their heads, Karen had left fuming and sputtering, and the neighbors, they left whispering, confused but curious. I hadn't planned for the confrontation to escalate so quickly, but I wasn't naive either. I knew that once the HOA realized they couldn't bully me with fake claims about community property, they'd dig deeper. Karen wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat gracefully. My phone vibrated on the porch railing. It was an email notification from my attorney, Jacob.Morning. Ethan confirming the sale officially closed yesterday evening. Paperwork is filed. You're now the legal owner of the entire Marina property, including all docks and slips. HOA has no claim. Call me if Karen tries anything. A slow grin spread across my face as I read the words twice to make sure I wasn't dreaming. It was real. Not only was my shoreline secure, but the Marina, the HOA's crown jewel, was mine. Months of quiet research and discreet meetings with the bank had paid off. They'd been so busy patrolling kayaks and handing out fines that they hadn't even noticed the developer had defaulted on the Marina loan. And while they were busy chasing me off my own land, I had quietly bought the very thing they thought gave them power. I was still savoring the victory when the sound of crunching gravel announced a visitor. I looked up to see a familiar black SUV pulling into my driveway. The HOA's logo was painted boldly on the side like a sheriff's badge. Karen was back, and this time she wasn't alone. 3 other board members climbed out behind her, 2 men in polo shirts, and a woman clutching a clipboard like it was a sword. Karen stepped forward, her heels clicking on the gravel as if each step declared war. "Ethan," she began, her voice sugar-sweet but her eyes sharp as broken glass. "We need to talk. Now." I set my coffee mug down slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her squirm. "Good morning to you too, Karen," I said evenly. "What brings the HOA to my side of the lake?" "You know why we're here?" she snapped, dropping the fake politeness. "That ridiculous stunt last night with the police. It doesn't change anything. The Marina belongs to the Lakeview Community Association, and you launching your boat without a permit is still a violation of our bylaws." One of the men behind her, tan, and clearly trying to look intimidating, nodded and crossed his arms. "We'll take legal action if necessary," he added. I tilted my head, pretending to think. Interesting claim, but before you waste any more breath, let me show you something. I reached for the folder sitting on my porch table, the same one I'd handed to the officers the night before. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out the fresh purchase agreement stamped and signed by the county clerk. "This," I said, holding it out so they all could see, "is proof that I own the Marina. As of last night, it's private property, my private property." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Karen blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air. The clipboard woman squinted at the document, then looked to Karen for direction. "That's impossible," Karen finally managed, her voice rising. "The Marina is part of our association. We've maintained it for years. We collect dues for it. You can't just buy it." "I didn't buy it from you," I replied calmly. "I bought it from the bank. The original developer defaulted, and the bank put it up for a quiet auction. You should really keep better track of your financial paperwork." The 2 men shifted uneasily, clearly blindsided. The woman with the clipboard leaned closer to Karen and whispered something urgent. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Karen's jaw tighten as the realization sank in. They hadn't just lost a piece of property, they'd lost their biggest source of leverage over every homeowner who depended on the Marina for boating, fishing, and summer recreation. Karen tried one last desperate tactic. "Even if what you're saying is true," she said sharply, "the community still has rights to use the Marina under the easement agreement. We'll fight this in court if we have to." I met her glare with a calm smile. "You're welcome to review the purchase documents with your lawyer, but you'll find there is no active easement filed. The original agreement expired when the developer defaulted, and no one in your HOA renewed it. As of now, this Marina is private. Anyone who wants to use it will need permission from me." The silence that followed was almost musical. Birds chirped in the distance. A fish jumped somewhere out on the water. The HOA board stood frozen, processing the weight of what I'd just said. One of the men finally cleared his throat. "Karen, is that possible?" he asked in a low voice. Karen shot him a withering look, but her confidence was cracking. She turned back to me, her eyes blazing with barely contained rage. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You think you've won, but the community won't stand for this. We'll appeal, we'll protest. You'll do whatever you feel you need to do." I interrupted gently. "But while you're busy planning, I'll be posting new signage and updating the county registry. Starting today, all Marina operations, fees, and access rights will be managed by me. Have a nice day, Karen." For a long second, she looked like she might explode. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and marched back to the SUV. Her board members followed like chastened soldiers, each of them carefully avoiding my eyes. The tires spat gravel as they sped back up the driveway, disappearing into the trees. I let out a long breath once they were gone, the tension draining from my shoulders. This was only the beginning. I knew it. Karen wasn't the type to surrender gracefully, but the law was on my side, and I had the paperwork to prove it. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the marina with Jacob, my attorney, who had driven out from town to inspect the property. We strolled along the docks, as he pointed out the legal boundaries marked on the county survey map. They have no standing, Jacob said confidently, tapping the wooden post where the property line cut through the main dock. The sale is airtight. They can bluster and threaten lawsuits, but they can't undo this. If anything, they'll eventually have to negotiate with you if their residents want continued access. I nodded, watching the sunlight dance on the water. Boats bobbed gently in their slips, each one a quiet reminder of the control Karen once thought she held. I'm not looking to start a war, I said thoughtfully, but I also won't be bullied. If they want to use the marina, they'll have to respect my terms. Jacob grinned. Sounds like leverage to me. That night, I posted a notice on the main dock, right beside the HOA's old rules board. It was simple and direct. Private marina, property of Ethan Cole, authorized access only. Future use subject to new agreements. By the time the sun set, neighbors from across the lake were already drifting over in their boats, curious and cautious. Some looked worried, others intrigued. A few even smiled and gave me small waves. Not everyone in the HOA was a Karen. Some were tired of the endless fines and petty rules. One elderly couple approached me as I secured my boat for the evening. Are the rumors true? The woman asked softly. Do you really own the marina now? Yes, ma'am, I replied. But I'm not here to shut people out. I just won't be pushed around anymore. The man chuckled, his eyes twinkling. About time someone stood up to that board, he said. Maybe this lake will finally belong to the people who actually care about it. Their words warmed me more than I expected. I realized this fight wasn't just about property lines or legal rights. It was about restoring a sense of fairness to a place I loved. Karen and her board might rage and scheme, but the tide had already turned. The community was beginning to see through the illusion of HOA control. As darkness fell, I sat on the dock, listening to the water lap against the pilings. For the first time since buying the cabin, I felt truly at peace. The lake was quiet, the stars reflected like diamonds on the surface, and the marina, once a symbol of HOA dominance, was now a testament to patience, strategy, and a little bit of quiet revenge. Karen could plot all she wanted, but the truth was undeniable. The lake was mine. The marina was mine. And for the first time, the HOA was powerless. The days following the HOA's humiliating discovery unfolded like ripples on a calm lake, small at first, but spreading wider and wider until the entire shoreline felt the shift. By the end of the week, I could sense a new energy in the air. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved when they passed my cabin in their boats. Parents walked their kids down to the dock without the stiff tension of fear that Karen's board had cultivated for years. The marina, once patrolled by rule-obsessed volunteers with clipboards, now rested under a quiet, watchful peace. But while the residents of Lakeview began to relax, I knew one person would never let go without a fight. Sure enough, early Saturday morning, I heard the crunch of gravel and the unmistakable screech of Karen's SUV tires cutting into my driveway. I was tightening a rope on my boat when I saw her storming down the path, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Behind her trailed two men I hadn't seen before, new board members. Judging by their stiff polos and sour expressions, Karen's eyes blazed as she marched straight to me, stopping just a few feet away. This, she said, thrusting a piece of paper at my chest, is a notice of intent to sue. The HOA demands immediate restoration of community rights to the marina and the removal of all private signage. You have 48 hours to comply. I took the paper calmly, scanning the page as she fumed. It was a hastily written threat, full of vague legal jargon but lacking any real teeth. My attorney Jacob had warned me they'd try something like this. He even predicted the exact language, intent to sue, a favorite phrase of HOAs trying to intimidate, without actual grounds. Karen, I said evenly, I've reviewed every document, every deed, every survey. You know as well as I do this will go nowhere. You don't have standing, and the easement you relied on expired years ago. Your board let it lapse. This marina is legally mine. Karen's face reddened, her jaw tightening as if she could bite through steel. You can't do this. This lake belongs to the community. We built the docks. We paid for maintenance. You can't just swoop in and steal it. I didn't steal anything, I replied, my voice calm but firm. I bought it, fair and legal. And if you really cared about this lake, you wouldn't have let your developer default or your board neglect the paperwork. One of the new board members stepped forward, his voice low but edged with frustration. Karen, maybe we should talk to our lawyer again. No, she snapped, spinning on him. We don't back down to squatters. The word stung, but only for a moment. I took a slow breath and met her fiery glare. I'm not your enemy, I said quietly. This isn't about me versus the community. It's about fairness. You've used this marina as a weapon for years. Fiends, threats, frets, permits. I'm done playing that game. But if your neighbors want to fish, swim, or launch a boat, they're welcome. They just won't be bullied anymore. For the first time, Karen hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the lake, where a group of residents stood on the opposite dock, watching. Some whispered to each other, pointing in our direction. Their faces weren't hostile, they looked curious, even hopeful. Karen noticed it too. The crowd wasn't rallying behind her. "This isn't over," she muttered finally, her voice lower now, more defeated than defiant. Without another word, she spun around and stalked back to her SUV. The board members exchanged uneasy glances before following her. Their shoulders slumped like soldiers leaving a lost battlefield. The tires kicked up a cloud of dust as they sped away, leaving only the sound of birds and the gentle slap of water against the dock. I exhaled slowly, the tension melting away like ice in the morning sun. I knew Karen wouldn't give up entirely. People like her rarely did, but her power was broken. Without the Marina, her threats were hollow. The community was watching, and they were no longer afraid. Later that afternoon, I hosted an informal gathering at the Marina. I hadn't planned anything fancy, just a simple meet and greet for anyone curious about the new ownership. I grilled burgers, set out coolers of cold drinks, and opened the docks for fishing and boat launches. By mid-afternoon, families began to trickle in, some timid, others openly relieved. Kids raced along the wooden planks, their laughter ringing across the water. Parents smiled, chatting with neighbors they hadn't spoken to in months. An elderly man named Walter approached me with a firm handshake. "Ethan, I've lived here for 20 years, he said. "Karen's rules nearly drove us out. What you did? Well, it's about time someone stood up to her." "Thank you," I replied, humbled. "This Marina isn't just for me. It belongs to everyone who respects it. I'm happy to keep it open as long as we work together." One by one, residents voiced similar sentiments. They were tired of the HOA's constant fines and petty restrictions. Some admitted they'd considered selling their homes just to escape the tension. Now, for the first time, they felt like the lake might actually be theirs again. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the water, I walked to the end of the dock and looked out over the lake. Boats floated peacefully in their slips, their reflections shimmering on the calm surface. Children splashed near the shore. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation, a soundtrack of freedom and relief. Jacob joined me, handing me a cold drink. "Looks like you've started a revolution," he said with a grin. "I didn't set out to," I replied, watching a group of kids race to the edge of the dock. "I just wanted to fish in peace. But maybe this is bigger than fishing. Maybe it's about showing people they don't have to be pushed around." Jacob nodded. "Karen will fight a little more, but the community's already on your side. She's done." I thought back to the first time I launched my boat. The sirens screaming, the HOA threatening, the cops unsure who to believe. Back then, I felt like a lone fisherman against a tidal wave of bureaucracy. Now, standing on the very Marina they once ruled, I felt something stronger than victory, belonging. As darkness settled over the lake, lanterns lit the docks and fireflies flickered like tiny stars. Neighbors lingered, reluctant to end the evening. Some asked about renting slips for their boats. Others offered to help maintain the docks. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, a community coming together not because of rules or fines, but because they wanted to. When the last family finally headed home, I stayed behind, sitting on the edge of the dock with my feet dangling over the water. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and fresh lake water. I thought about Karen, about the battles we'd fought, about the quiet strength it had taken to stand firm. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a deep, steady peace. Owning the Marina wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about reclaiming the simple joys that should have belonged to everyone all along: the freedom to fish, to float, to gather without fear of a fine. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, vast and as if to remind me that water always finds its way around obstacles. When I finally stood to leave, I looked back at the sign I'd posted days earlier: "Private Marina property of Ethan Cole. Community welcome. Respect required." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Thank you for reading this incredible, true-to-life story of standing up to power and reclaiming what's yours. For more gripping stories like this, like, share, comment, and subscribe to Bright Reality on YouTube. Your support helps bring more real stories to life.